So with all the craziness in DC, taking time to connect with your neighbors just feels good. So don't miss District Bridge's Art All Night, DC's biggest arts festival. It celebrates creativity, culture, and community, and it's returning September 12th and 13th across all 8 wards. You can find celebrations by District Bridges in Mount Pleasant, Cleveland Park, Lower Georgia Avenue, Logan Circle, and U Street. Dance to local bands and support local artists in your favorite neighborhood restaurants and outdoor spaces. It's way more important than ever to show our local business owners and artists that we see them and we support them. See the full lineup at districtbridges.org/artallnight.
What if making dinner was as easy as pressing play on your favorite song? It can be when you plug into an electric induction stove. Whether you're queuing up the meatloaf or the black eyed peas, an electric induction stove isn't just faster, it can save you energy and money too. And right now, the DCSU is offering a hot $800 off. Income qualified, no cost. These rebates won't last. Get them while funding's still available. So make the switch today. You've got the power! Visit dcscu.com/electric.
Today on CityCast DC, the fate of the Smithsonian is one of DC's biggest storylines of the year. And a lot has happened since the last time reporter Manuel Roig-Franzia joined us to talk about it. Today, he's getting into President Trump's latest demands on Washington's most prominent museums and when we are likely to see what happens in response. Today is Wednesday, September 3rd. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Manuel.
Hey, good to be with you, Mike.
Thanks for being here. So we talked to you in April about the early days of Trump's campaign against inappropriate ideology in the Smithsonian. There's been a ton of change since then. Can you take me through that?
Yeah, it's been a very active and unsettling time for people at the Smithsonian. What the president has done is first issue an executive order in which he was very critical of the Smithsonian. That was back in March. But an even bigger thing happened in August when his White House issued an order to conduct this really very extensive review of the content of 8 museums. And that's something that is truly unprecedented for a White House to be doing.
They also instructed in, I think, June, Lonnie Bunch, who's the secretary of the Smithsonian, the founding director of the African American History Museum, to conduct a review to ensure, quote unquote, unbiased content in June. How is this August thing different than the June thing?
Well, the August thing is laid out in incredible detail. And it is coming from Lindsay Halligan, who is a White House counselor who was also very active in the takeover of the Kennedy Center by the Trump administration. And what makes this so extraordinary is that they are requiring, I should say, it's not really an ask, they are requiring a review of very granular things at the Smithsonian, stuff like wall didactics. And it's just an incredible amount of material. And I think people at the Smithsonian have been completely thrown for a loop because they have tens of millions of objects in their collection. And this most recent request does signal that this is not the end. They're starting with 8 museums, but they're planning to make the same request for all the rest of the museums, 21 museums, the National Zoo, research centers. The scope of it is mind-boggling.
So have they literally been sending White House officials or others into museums to inspect the artwork? And I guess the wall didactics means the plaques?
Yeah, I'm not aware of that happening at this point. According to the order that came from the White House, they are asking people at the Smithsonian to gather up all of this information and to submit it to the White House for review. So at this stage, it doesn't appear that people from the White House are actually going through the Smithsonian and pointing at a painting or a sculpture land art and saying that isn't going to be there anymore. But the worry, and it's a significant worry, is that will happen at some point once all of this material that the White House is requesting is given to the White House. The one thing I just would add about this is it's not 100% clear that the material that is being asked for will actually ever be given, because the White House does not have traditionally control of the Smithsonian. The president does not name members to the board. I've talked to legal experts who say the White House simply cannot tell the Smithsonian what to do. So now the ball is in the court of Secretary Lonnie Bunch and the Board of Regents to see how they react to this request, which pretty much every legal expert you talk to will say is not within the legal authority of the president.
So that's what I was actually going to get to, because one of the other things that's happened since last time we spoke was Trump claimed to have fired the director of the National Portrait Gallery. She said, actually, you don't have the authority to fire me. And the Smithsonian board backed her up. And then not long afterwards, she left on her own. I gather a lot happened behind the scenes around those events. Can you explain what happened, how the board came to back her up?
I'm not sure if that's the way that I would term it. No member of the board made a public statement in support of her. You're talking about Kim Sayed, who ran the National Portrait Gallery. The board issued one of those somewhat boilerplate statements that said they have the authority to hire the secretary, and the secretary is in charge of hiring and firing of the directors of the museums. But there was no big stand taken in behalf of her. And while the activities of that board are very opaque because they do not take place in the public view, their meetings are not open to the press or to the public. What is clear is that publicly there was no issue of a statement, there was no press conference, there was no interview that I'm aware of that was given by any member of the board that said, we stand by this particular museum director. She chose to leave of her own accord because she wanted to not put her personal interests ahead of those of the museum.
So this board is what's called a self-perpetuating board, i.e. the next board members are picked by the current board. There's, as you said, it's not like the Kennedy Center where the president names them. It's not like most of the boards in town. I did notice that the most recent new board member I noticed was a member of the Perot family who's married to a big Trump donor. Who are the other members of this board that officially have the final say-so over the Smithsonian?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Two very interesting members of the board. The chancellor of the Smithsonian, and a lot of people don't know this, is by tradition the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So John Roberts, the Chief Justice, actually presides at board meetings. And from what I understand, he attends them and takes it very seriously. Also on the board is J.D. Vance, the vice president. And he plays a really important role in all of this because that initial executive order designates J.D. Vance to be involved in reviewing of content. But here's another key. Also in making sure that content that didn't fit what the president considers appropriate for the Smithsonian, that no funds, no money would be allocated for those sorts of things. And JD is one, Vice President Vance is the one who is supposed to be enforcing that. And that is significant too. And the reason is that the Smithsonian gets about 60%, almost 2/3 of its budget from the federal government. And so when you hold the checkbook, you hold the power.
So to get a sense of the things that J.D. Vance and the others are looking for, the White House relatively recently released this article called President Trump Was Right About the Smithsonian. And it singled out a list of Smithsonian content. What was on that list?
So the White House released a statement that was headlined in big letters, President Trump is right about the Smithsonian. And it ticks off some specifics that he is identifying as problematic. And one of them is a couple of flags that are at the American History Museum, and they're flagging, for lack of a better word, the fact that one of them is an intersex inclusive progress pride flag.
Surely that flag is not put up next to a sign saying this is awesome. It's just like this was, for better or worse, a major factor of our national culture in the last decade.
Yeah,
that's history,
there is
right?
no "this is awesome" right next to it, but it is flying, at least in the photograph that the White House brought along with their statement, underneath the Smithsonian flag and underneath the United States flag. But it is interesting that that image has rankled the president and the White House. There's another one at the National Portrait Gallery, and this is a painting that they say is commemorating the act of illegally crossing the southern border. It shows some people who appear to be Latinos anxiously looking off into the distance as they're climbing onto a ladder that appears to be going over to the top of that very recognizable border wall with its vertical beams. There's a long list here.
And did this list say what should be done? Did it demand their removal, or did it just say they should be next to a plaque saying this is bad? Or what?
Essentially, he's putting this out there, the best I can tell, to almost lay a predicate to make a case, almost as a lawyer might do with an opening statement, for the things that he's planning to do related to the Smithsonian. And where in some cases he's spoken more in general terms, saying that the Smithsonian is woke, saying that it focuses too much on slavery. Here you have a list of items that he's showing the world that he believes are problematic. One of the other very interesting ones in that list is a drawing of Anthony Fauci, who has become a real lightning rod in the conservative right. And I think there might be some people in America who consider Fauci a hero. In right-wing media, he's considered quite the opposite. And now the president is saying there's a problem with there being...
Can't they just scribble devil horns on the drawing?
Not yet, although I would expect that to possibly show up on social media at some point.
So he gave them 120 days. At the beginning of August, he gave them 128 days to start making changes. Have any changes been made that a regular visitor might notice?
Not a lot of major changes related specifically to this request have been made. There was recently, based on Washington Post reporting, a removal of some material related to Trump's impeachment. There was a reason given for that seemed to indicate it wasn't to protect him, and the references were put back but slightly altered. I think that is a very clear example that people are pointing to that makes them worried. But this much larger initiative, which involves 8 museums, has yet to completely come to fruition. It'll be very interesting to see what they do, partly because of the ones that they have chosen. You have things that you would expect. National Museum of African American History and Culture, obviously that talks a lot about slavery, and slavery is one of the things that is being mentioned over and over by Trump and by his White House as being problematic in the Smithsonian. But you also have the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. That's a very different kind of calculation that will be made. That's contemporary art and could be much more open to interpretation, say, than a historical marker that talks about the impeachment of Trump. So I would really be keeping an eye on that as this moves forward.
At Mosaic Theater, royalty, fate, and passion collide in the thrilling new play, Dodi and Diana. This is not just another historical drama. Egyptian actress Samira and her husband Jason are marking the 25th anniversary of the tragic deaths of Princess Diana and Dodi Fayed. But what starts as a night of royal obsession and remembrance quickly becomes something much deeper. Their own marriage is put to the ultimate test as they dive into a complex exploration of love, sacrifice, the stories that history chooses to remember, and the ones it doesn't. Dodi and Diana runs September 4th through October 5th at the Atlas Performing Arts Center. You can get tickets now at mosaictheater.org. That's mosaictheater.org.
For nearly 40 years, Food and Friends has delivered hope and health across the D.C. region with home-delivered, medically tailored meals for neighbors living with serious illnesses like HIV/AIDS, diabetes, cancer, and more. This October, you can be part of that mission by joining Move for Meals, a month-long fitness and fundraising challenge. Walk, run, or bike wherever you are. Track your time exercising via the fitness app Strava and raise funds for neighbors in need. Every $10 you raise provides one medically tailored meal, ensuring that more people facing serious illnesses receive the nutrition that they need to heal. Help us reach our goal of 20,000 meals. Sign up today at p2p.onecause.com/moveformeals or visit foodandfriends.org and help us deliver hope and health one meal at a time. Hey, when someone else's negligence changes your life forever, figuring out what to do next can feel overwhelming. You need lawyers who won't back down. The NACE Law Group has been winning serious injury and wrongful death cases in D.C. for decades. They don't just settle, they fight for real justice, and they're not afraid to take cases to court to get it. You might remember them as Paulson and Nace. It's the same trusted lawyers, just a new name. If you need someone in your corner, reach out to NACE Law Group for a free, no-obligation consultation. Visit WashingtonDCInjuryLawyers.com or call 202-463-1999. That's 202-463-1999. So the big headline news from a Smithsonian museum this summer was the cancellation of Amy Sherald's show at the American Art Museum. This is a contemporary artist famous for a painting of Michelle Obama. There's a show, it's been in a number of other cities, and she pulled out. It was supposed to open in September. She pulled out saying she's being censored. What happened there, and what is your read of what it means?
Well, for those who aren't familiar with the details of this particular incident, Amy Sherald has become a very famous artist because of her portrait of Michelle Obama that has gotten so much praise. And she was going to be having a show at the National Portrait Gallery in which she was intending to display a Statue of Liberty that was a trans person. And this became a big item of discussion. She says that there were efforts being made by the museum, or that she thought would be made, to dial that back, change the art in some way, and she chose to cancel her show. That's significant because she is a really big name. But I would throw this out for you to consider, Michael, and that is that when you're Amy Sherald, you can dictate a lot of your terms, right? Because you are a big name. There are dozens of museums that would be jumping through hoops to display your art. But now put yourself in the shoes of a less famous artist who has an opportunity to be displayed at the Smithsonian, whether the Smithsonian is having its content controlled by the White House or not. How do you say no to that? It puts you on the map internationally.
Yeah.
And do you then self-edit yourself? Do you present stuff that might be softer than you would have under other circumstances? I think these are the calculations that a less well-known artist might have to make.
And I think we're in a particularly odd moment because after 2020, when all of the protests about Black Lives Matter, a lot of cultural institutions made promises to better represent the country, better represent marginalized communities. In the art world, it takes a long time for shows to get organized. So a lot of that stuff is sort of hitting the market right now at this moment when the winds have shifted pretty dramatically. And I think this sets the stage for a lot of these controversies.
Yeah, these shows have tremendous lead times. And the curation that goes into them is detailed and extensive. And it's possible, I would think, and will also be interesting to watch, that if this review that we've been talking about ends up being very invasive and ends up in a lot of material being either altered or removed, will there be pressure placed on people whose art is going to be shown in Smithsonian shows from the outside to step away? Does that happen? We don't know because we don't know how effective this will be. We don't know yet what the Smithsonian is going to do in response. I think there's a school of thought that says the Smithsonian will attempt to make some changes in order to appease the White House. That would be a sort of way of threading the needle, not giving up too much independent content, but giving Trump something of what he wants. It's really all up in the air right now.
Have you heard anything from curators, people making decisions about shows we may not see for years, about what their thinking is right now?
Well, I'm telling you, the Smithsonian's pretty clamped down right now.
Yeah.
I think that there is an environment of tremendous anxiety and a feeling that you don't want to stick your head up from behind the barricade and have it shot off. So we're not hearing a ton.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, from at the suits end, I mean, it looks to me like the White House would be very happy to be rid of Lonnie Bunch. Is that something they would be allowed to do, or what would they do if they wanted to bring that about?
Well, I think that it would be up to the board at that point to make a stand. It's pretty clear that there has been some tension between Lonnie Bunch and Donald Trump. If you recall, Lonnie in his memoir wrote about this sort of awkward moment where he was showing a display at the National Museum of African American History and Culture that had to do with slavery to Trump. And Trump, rather than respond to what the display was saying about slavery, went off on a tangent about how they love him in Denmark. And it was a moment that Lonnie thought was worth including in his memoir. And he said he was pretty stunned. And the only thing he could say was that he was just going to move on.
Right. Lonnie Bunch is a fairly revered figure insofar as museum directors have any kind of public presence among regular people. What do you think the fallout would be if he was pushed out?
I think it would be big. But I think we also have to remember that it's different being the secretary of the Smithsonian, which is a job that requires a lot of diplomacy, might even require some compromises, than it was being the Lonnie Bunch who we all first met years ago,
right,
when he was promoting the creation of the National Museum of African American history and culture. I remember those days, it's almost impossible to listen to the radio and not hear him. He was on NPR all the time. And he was this charismatic, charming, enthusiastic figure who I think really did whittle his way into the hearts of a lot of people, inside and outside the Smithsonian. As the head of the Smithsonian, it's different. You're not necessarily always the booster. Sometimes you're the person who has to deliver bad news. I can say that from what I understand of the inner workings of the Smithsonian right now, Lonnie has been a cheerleader for the staff and has continuously tried to buck them up. And I think you gain a lot by taking that approach. And my sense is he's a pretty well-liked figure within the institution, as well as outside of the institution on the American left. Obviously, we are a very divided country.
So just like one more question looking forward now. It is a matter of law that there is supposed to be a Latino museum that opens and a women's history museum. Are those going to happen? Can the Trump administration stop them? Does the law mandate that they have to happen by a certain time? How is that going to work?
I mean, I would say they're at great risk. Congress is involved in the funding for those museums, and there's not yet built. There's no physical structure. There's a suggestion about possible locations for them, but there are a million ways that both the White House and their allies in Congress can that up indefinitely. So I wouldn't be holding your breath to go visit the Latino Museum anytime soon.
Manuel, thank you so much for being here.
It's always a pleasure talking with you.
And thank you to our newest CityCast DC neighbors, Gabanga T, James C, and Mina E. If you want to become a CityCast DC neighbor and support our work, plus get great perks, head to membership.citycast.fm. And hey, that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.